Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Design Recharge. I'm your host, Diane Gibbs, and this week we have Reina Takahashi, and I met Reina in Cleveland this past August at WMC Fest. So if you haven't seen or heard her, you will probably know who she is when you see some of her work. But she's so humble, had such a great story. I had notes and notes, pages of notes. And one of the things that I just loved was that she just had this kind of effervescent spirit for sure. But she was like, I just went for it. It was hard, but I just go for it. And I love that kind of attitude because a lot of times we all need that. So without further ado, Reina, thank you so much for being here. And will you just kind of give everybody a little bit of, because I think one of the things that was so impressive to me was you were just like a normal designer. And then you just kind of, not that you were weird now, not at all, but you have such an amazing transformation because you were doing like financial, like for a bank or something, like UX, UI stuff, right?
Yeah. So thank you for having me. My background is kind of all over the place, I guess, in terms of not having anything to do with paper. I went to school in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Ohio. And then my first job was at a financial analysis company called Morningstar. They do all kinds of fund and investment analysis, but they have this really amazing design team in-house. And so when I went there, I was primarily doing UI and UX for their website and also for their mobile application. And so it was actually kind of funny because my background in school was all print. And then here I was learning how to front-end code and publishing that, and then also working on mobile. And that was for the iPhone 3 and BlackBerry, so it was quite a while ago, but that's where I started. After that, I went on to consulting, and that was pretty interesting too because our company was responsible for working with our clients and figuring out sort of what was next in terms of a new service or a new product. So I got to go on a lot of research to actually talk to customers and how they spend their daily lives, and then also visualize, some of these new ideas that we can suggest to our clients. So pretty different from paper art, but for the 5 years that I was in Chicago, that's what I was doing.
That's cool. So then you started doing some personal exploration when you were in Chicago, and then you talked about at WMC Fest how you really kind of dug down once you got to San Francisco. So what were you doing, and were you kind of exploring a lot of different, like, were you painting, or was it always kind of three-dimensional? Were you always kind of drawn to a more sculptural art?
Definitely. I wasn't really into sculpture per se or anything like that. I guess since I was really young, I was really into like handmade crafts and stuff like that. So I explored all kinds of things when I was little, from like stamping was a big one, stamping and embossing, cross stitch, embroidery, crochet, that kind of thing. So I think that's when I kind of realized that you can really make anything. But after school, I did primarily focus on paper. One of my senior projects was in paper, and that's sort of what kicked it off. And then, I did random other things, like I took figure drawing classes and a woodworking class, which I was terrible at. I was really bad. It was with like a mortise and chisel by hand, making joints and stuff. My things never fit together, but it was still pretty fun. So yeah, it's been mostly paper since graduating.
So then what happened? So you moved to California, and because you said you really went into a deep dive of doing kind of this exploration, because I feel like a lot of times people are either they know they don't really want to they want to start a side project, but they don't really know what. And then, or some people are at the stage of, hey, like Carly, who was also at WMC Fest, makes these great little 3D, they're just so cute. You guys should check her out. Carly, you should write your thing in the chat. And Clea's here from Ireland. So great to see you. But like, they're at a stage where, what do I do with this? I know what I want to do. I've made these things. I'm making work. What's that next step? Where were you in the process when you moved to California?
Sure. So for the 5 years that I was in Chicago, I did continue to make things out of paper, but it was mostly for myself. And I posted it to my Tumblr. Mostly it was my family that was looking at it. And in retrospect, those 5 years, I think, were more about foundational skills. So I was learning sort of how to use the knife and how paper reacts to different environments and how to fold it and curve it and that kind of thing. And so it wasn't very much of a conscious decision, I guess, but I sort of fell into doing a project in San Francisco once I got here that ended up being sort of my pivotal project into realizing that I really loved doing this all the time.
Was that the 826 Valencia project, or was
Yeah,
that?
it was.
So if you want to show some of those, that would be great. And then kind of walk them through, because so if you were just kind of doing this on your own, you're posting these. So it's really kind of still a passion project, a hobby. You're probably not doing something like this for clients yet, right? Or were you?
Right. So 826, I guess it's technically sort of a client, but it's my sort of volunteer work. And so they're a nonprofit. For anyone who's not familiar, 826 is this great nonprofit that focuses on helping students improve their creative writing and expository writing. But they have this amazing store where they sell all of these like pirate supplies. And so you can get peg legs or eye patches or all kinds of really whimsical and funny stuff. But anyway, I wanted to volunteer to tutor. And so I didn't have creative stuff in mind at all, but I was trying to volunteer to tutor, and then also signed up to be a creative volunteer to design some of their student books. And then I also just checked off window display as something I was interested in. And I thought it was, helping the store staff install windows or climbing ladders or something like that. But I can share my screen and show you what I ended up doing.
That would be great. So before this, you had been had you been going into the space, and had you seen other store display windows?
I had gone to the space before, and that's how I knew about them as an organization, and that's why I wanted to volunteer with them. And I'd heard about them before in Chicago. They have a shop in Chicago as well. And so I got an email from the store. This is the window, the first one that I ever did for them. And the store manager emailed me and had seen my work from my creative application and asked me to do one of their windows. And she was very excited. And I'd never met her before, but she somehow kind of saw something in my work to be able to do a giant window. So it was pretty scary. But
so like with the 826 here, are you doing foam tape that keeps it off, or are you cutting it out of like foam core?
It's a mix. So the main stuff, so this is a treasure map in this shape of San Francisco. This main one is layers of foam core, but I covered all of the sides with paper. And then the rest of it is all paper. So you can see a little bit of a close-up of one of them. So this is Golden Gate Park with a creature in it.
That's awesome.
And then it was also my first time installing work, so I had a lot of friends helping me with that too.
And then you even did the bottom. So the first picture, you can kind of see the little ship and then the waves. So, because this is very sculptural, maybe you weren't good at woodworking, but really this kind of molded, have even as a kid, or were like clay, or was it always kind of, because I think it's different. You think differently when you have to think and mold, and it really is getting to know the medium. And I mean, you took 5 years of really getting to know, but like, had you made trees like this or waves like this before?
No, a lot of this was experimentation before actually figuring out what the form would be. So I either start by kind of making a few drawings of what the form could look like, and then also experiment with actual scraps of paper to see how the forms will fit together. Yeah, and prior to this, I had done a lot of stuff in 2D, but I hadn't done that much stuff in 3D. So that was another hurdle for me here, was the fact that it was in 3D, the fact that it would be in a window facing the sun for 3 months. That kind of thing is something that I'd never had to think about before.
So then, because it's, and you and I kind of talked about this a little bit off camera, or on camera, but not recording, that was what kind of paper. And so you in this process have figured out a lot about maybe light fastness, or about what colors are best, what, paper folds better. And really it's like with the grain, probably you have to really be specific on where the grain is if you have something really big. But is this still the 826 project? I know you've done it since this first one. Is this one of the biggest projects, like physically biggest projects that you've worked on, or have you done even larger?
No, this is definitely the biggest. The window itself, I guess you don't see a full view of it, but from edge to edge is 15 feet. And then it's not very deep. It's maybe 1.5 to 2 feet deep, and then 7 feet high. So it's really big. And every year I'm terrified of whether I can fill it or not.
So you always do it 1/4 out of the year for them?
Yeah, basically. I'm always doing the holiday window. I just did the fourth one, but the fourth one was really exciting because I got to work with 4 other paper artists. It was an extra special window for their 15th year anniversary. So it was way bigger and way more massive scale than I could have ever done by myself.
That's awesome. So how long are you, and this is all in your spare time because this is volunteer, correct?
Yeah. So yeah, I was doing these on weekends and before or after work too.
So, but this, a lot of people pass by this window. So you actually got some press, I guess, from doing this window. Was it a lot different? And Carly had a great question. She was this project, I know it was different for you, but was it different than what they had in the store before?
I think so. I mean, they have a fair number of displays that they design on their own. It might be a feature on their scholarship winners, that sort of thing. And they occasionally have artists putting work in the windows. So they have had like very intricate, wide, giant scale windows before. I think it might be the first time that they consistently have a person for the holiday window. And so that's a little bit different for them.
So Carly asked a question, which I thought is really good. 15 feet is a big space. So before you took on this project, she asked, did you do any research about window design specifically, or did you just jump in? And I know you said you did some sketches, and you always do some sketches. And Linda said she'd love to see some of your sketches. I don't know if you have any you can pull up or hold up to the camera.
Yeah.
Just maybe take us off screen share before you do that. But did you do any research on screen? I mean, not on screen share.
On window.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking a lot for inspiration of other window installations and seeing how people fill the space, how you use sort of like the foreground space versus the background space, that sort of thing. And there's a lot out there that's really cool. But I didn't really, I guess, read into anything in terms of how to hang things or anything technical. What I did realize maybe halfway through was that my forte up until that point is smaller objects. And so what I did and what you saw is that, you know, there were a few really big objects to fill up the space, but then on the actual treasure map itself, it's like all of these little things. And so that's sort of the mix that I came up with for that one.
And that really used your strengths, right? You could get the scroll was really big in the water, but the water was made up of smaller pieces. But also you're limited on what size paper you can, use, because then the scroll might have just been like butcher paper. And then I don't know if you had to paint it. It kind of looked like it was aged, right?
That was the hardest part, was finding paper big enough. It was actually a roll of watercolor, and I dyed it with tea and coffee.
Oh, wow. That's great. It looks aged. So that's good. So do you have any of your sketches?
Yeah, I don't have it for the 826 window, but I think I have some that would kind of explain my process a little bit.
So you're working on a pretty big sketchbook or sketch pad.
It's like this big.
Oh, so not too big. It looked bigger when it was right next to the machine.
It's just like really thin pages, which makes it easier for me to just think of it as scrap paper almost. This is a submarine that's yet to be finished that I was working on, and so I'll often think of what the actual shape looks like, and then I'll go into how it unfolds. And if I really need to, then I'll do measurements and stuff too.
That's awesome. I love that. So can you, because you've done so many kind of folds, do you need to practice on the paper first before you draw it, or do you always start with a drawing and then go from there?
Sometimes I actually prefer to go right to the paper if I can. So things like the 100-day project that I worked on was daily, and it was a little bit quicker. So I would go straight to paper and straight to cutting. Just because I think it's a little bit easier to experiment that way when it's live and it's real. But some of the bigger projects that I work on that are more geometric, or that I need to kind of think through all of the measurements before I start cutting, then I'll sketch those.
So when clients come to you, this isn't one of my questions either, but I just am filled with questions for you. When clients come to you, do they have a set size that they want you to do? Like, is the submarine going to be 8 inches, or do they say, you know, do whatever because you're going to photograph it, or have a photographer photograph it at whatever size they need it?
If the final output is a photograph, then they don't usually dictate how big it would be. There was one shoot that I was on that was like a tabletop shoot, and so in that case it has to fit on a tabletop, which works great for me. And then I guess if there are other objects or products within the shoot, then it would matter how big those are.
So with the 100-day project, this is something you decided to do food, right?
Yeah.
And these are fantastic. And you had done, like, there's some of them are so detailed, like it looks like sugar's dropped, but it's really just paper, right? And they're tiny, tiny. And then there's like a everything bagel one time. And so you're taking all these, it's not just the bagel. I mean, there's like salmon or something in there too, you know, like not real salmon people, but
that one.
Yeah, that would be great. So how big were those? Are you working like 4 inches by 4 inches? Just because it is, I would expect some of those would have taken a good bit of time, actually.
Most of them fit on like a 6 by 6 square, maybe. Yeah, they're all, I don't know if you can still see me. They're all about this big.
Okay. Yeah.
So these are some of those.
Pop-Tarts, love those. So can you go back to the Pop-Tart real quick?
Sure.
So you're really pulling it off the page too. So how were you propping it up on something?
Yeah, it was very informal. So I was always shooting in natural light, and just on my desk by my window. And when I felt like it would benefit from being propped up, I would just kind of make like a little triangle of paper and hope that it'll stay for the 2 seconds that I need to take a photo. It's not anything very formal at all. I'm not even using fishing line because it's such a quick study or a quick exercise. So yeah, it's very much a balancing game.
So you're taking these, were you taking these with a real camera or with your phone?
With a real camera. I actually have it here. I'm just using like a Sony Alpha 5000. I think that's what it's called.
Cool. Well, maybe you can send me a link for Amazon for something on that one. So then we'll share that so that's been a really good flexible camera for you.
Yeah. I've really loved using it.
Cool. All right. Let me go I'm skipping all around. So back to the 826 project. Were you, I guess this is more about your mental state at this time. You thought you were just going to be helping volunteer, and then they said like helping somebody with their writing, like not necessarily you just checked this box, and then you realized it was so big and you were doing it alone. What was the time frame? And then was there a point where you were like, ooh, this is a little too big?
Yes. Let's see. I think for that first one, I think I started talking to them in July or August, so sometime during the summer, and it installed before Thanksgiving. So their holiday stuff goes in around Thanksgiving time. And yeah, I guess just measuring the space, even just looking at it that first time, it was overwhelming. And even now I've tried it 4 times and it still feels daunting. Because if you don't fill the space, then it just looks really sparse. But if you make things too big, then it's just overwhelming if you're on the sidewalk right next to it.
Right.
So yeah, it was a challenge, and it was something that I was really scared and uncomfortable to do. But I didn't do it by myself either. I had a lot of help from friends who would kind of sit at my dining table and make trees, or, you know, help me climb ladders and put things up and stuff like that too.
So then it didn't feel so alone, but you still took on the challenge and you had that go for it kind of attitude, right?
Yeah, I guess so. There wasn't, I couldn't think of too many reasons to say no other than that it was uncomfortable.
Right. Well, and you had never done anything that big. I know I've interviewed other people. I know Derek Castle had gotten approached by Miller Lite, and he was like, he told them no. And then they came to his door the next day with a 6-pack of beer or 12-pack or something and said, we want you to reconsider. And I thought that's hilarious. But I think, I think sometimes saying no, there's more to it than just being scared, right? But I think sometimes you just have to go for it even if you haven't. Ezra has a great question. How did you get the edges of the paper to be rounded and raised like on the Pop-Tart icing?
Oh, I get that question a lot. Let me show you a tool.
Did you send me that tool? Silicone? No.
Oh, it's a version of one of the ones I showed you. Sorry, I'm digging around. Oh, it's back here. So I use these tools where the end is like a ball.
Mm-hmm. Is that like a burnisher set?
Yeah, so it's a burnisher, and that's in there. And basically, it's almost like you're folding the very, very, very edge of the paper. So you're kind of holding it at a diagonal and then running this along, and then that gives you that nice curve. And it catches the light in a really nice way too.
And they have that usually if you go to Hobby Lobby or Dick Blick, or if you want to see, can you hold it up? They usually have 2 sides, 2 points. One's fine. Mm-hmm. And I have some, it's like in the embossing section. And sometimes embossing will have like these metal plates, and you put the paper on top and then you kind of burnish to get that shape. So they have one this size, and then they sometimes will have a smaller size, right?
Yeah, I actually have, good, I have my tools right here. So this one is interchangeable, but I use both of these tips so often that I just bought 2. So this is for creasing. It's a little bit sharper.
Like a point.
Yeah, this one is like a point. So this is more for if I need to make a fold. And then this one is more for either a blunter fold, I guess, or burnishing the edge.
So Brian with a Y, I don't know where you're calling in from, but let us know. But he has a question. Do you ever work with wet paper to form it, or is it always folding, burnishing, rolling? Oh, this is my friend Brian. He's from Fort Smith, Arkansas. Okay, go ahead. Brian Alexis.
I worked with wetting the paper for that first 826 window, that scroll that you saw behind, especially because it was watercolor. I knew it could take the water. It's watercolor paper, so it could take water in the weight. And then if you dry it in the shape that you want it, then it'll usually stay pretty well. But the other paper I use on a daily basis is a little bit too thin for that, I think.
So you talked about like Canson has a really good drawing paper set. So are you just going and you're just buying, or are you buying, do you have like a whole stack of papers? Like people do like quilters, is part of your house just dedicated to, because I would think as a freelancer, you are investing some, and I don't know if you're buying it per sheet or by a pad or.
I'm a paper hoarder. I have a ton of it. But yeah, Canson, Fabriano, those are both drawing papers that you can get at Blick, and I use those quite a bit. And just because I usually buy them single, maybe 3 or 4 sheets at a time, but they're usually per project. And by now I've worked on it so much that I have a giant stack that's from leftovers or just half sheets that I didn't end up using and that sort of thing. And then I also have a letter size tray that has a lot of paper in it too.
Cool. So Ezra also wants to know, what paper weight do you usually use? 65 pound or 100 pound? And then why would you choose different weights for different parts of the project? Because I would think sometimes it really has to do with what you're doing, right?
Yeah, it definitely depends on what I'm doing. I'm really bad at paper weights. If anyone on the thing actually knows better. So this is a Canson paper, and it's pretty flexible, but it's not like a text weight. It's a little bit heavier. And that's usually what I use for anything that needs to be curved, especially. Thicker papers I use for especially for windows and things like that, where it needs to be structurally sound and it needs to be very solid. And it depends, like depending on the paper line, some of them will fold really nicely and curve really terribly, or some will curve nicely, like those kinds of things. You have to balance that too. And then also with the colors that are available.
So then what do you do with them? Do you just have a drawer full of paper art, or do you, because I would think some that's 3D I mean, you kind of have to squish it to save it, or you either have a really big apartment. And so, yeah,
sometimes I squish it. Like if I don't feel like I'm going to ever use it again, I squish it and it goes away, and that's fine. And I also have some boxes sort of in a storage-y space in our apartment but they're pretty small. Like my pieces you can hold them with your hands. And so I get like big, what are they called? Like plastic totes, and I put them in there.
But like the 100-day project, that's a lot of, if you have a lot of things that are this big, that's a lot of things.
I guess, but not all of them are true 3D either.
Right.
Like some of them are more flat, so I can stack them. And I think those all fit into like maybe shoebox size boxes.
Gotcha. And I spelled Canson, Carson. So sorry about that, people. It's Canson. It'll be in the show notes. So Nikki has a question. What's the process you go through to make the decision on what to use to get the desired effects? So I'm not sure if she's talking about conceptually or the physically, how you would roll something. But I think those 5 years of prep in that 100-day project probably taught you a lot about how the paper works, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I guess conceptually, what do I do? I try to kind of think of how well the form that I have in my head will represent that thing that I'm making. So if I'm making a Vespa, for example, like what are the actual forms that make a Vespa? I'm trying to kind of abstract to that. And then in terms of actually technically with the paper, I don't know, I think it is like having worked with it for a while, there are like a couple ideas I have in my head of how I'll start. And that's how I did the 100-day project too, is whenever I thought, I'm going to make a bagel today, then my mind sort of goes to what form it would take. And it doesn't always work. Like sometimes I try it and it looks not like a bagel at all. And then I have to kind of work with it a little bit.
Right. Kim says she loved the bagel. The bagel is amazing. One of the things I really liked in that 100-day project, it does seem like you were really pushing yourself. And granted, some days you probably had less time. The bagel day, I think you had more time because it's really involved. And also, again, the desired effect was, hey, I'm going to do something more 3D today, as opposed to maybe the Pop-Tart was more flat. But you lifted it up. And so I think you were also pushing your photography skills. You were pushing color probably a lot was something it really looks very, very colorful, very vibrant, but sometimes you were choosing different tones, which I loved that. So there was something I was going to ask you with the 100-day project. So what was the reason that you started it? How far into your paper career were you? How far after the Valencia project, the first Valencia project, did you start doing that 100-day project, and why?
So I actually, the food and breakfast one that you just saw is my second time doing the 100-day project. In 2014, I did my very first one. And that one was maybe 3 or 4 months after Valencia had ended. And I was looking for something to fill my time outside of work. After Valencia was over, it was just like I had my mornings free and I had my evenings free, and I kind of didn't know what to do. So the 100-day project came up as starting in April, and there are a lot of people on Instagram that try to start on the same day, so you can kind of follow along on progress of other people. And so that's why I did my first one. And then my second one, I kind of just wanted to commit to a project. And so having already done the 100-day project before, I knew it would be starting up. And then I had a few different goals this time than I did last time.
So what day does the 100-day project start up? Do you remember?
It's usually early April. There's a whole website for it. It's, if you Google the 100-day project, then you'll find it. It was started by a Bay Area artist as something where she kind of called upon a lot of creatives everywhere to just start. And you don't have to start on that day, but it's kind of cool to see.
But sometimes having accountability with other people helps you to just keep going, right?
Yeah, totally.
All right. So what other projects have you taken on that have been a little bit scarier, maybe, to you, or that have pushed your skills?
So I was trying to think of this earlier. There's actually one project that didn't really have too much to do with my making art, but this was a project that I did with the Chicago Design Museum. When I was living in Chicago, maybe 5 or 6 friends and I were interested in starting a new design organization. And what ended up happening was that I ended up organizing one of the exhibitions, and that's something that I would never have expected myself to sign up for at all. Like at the time, this was in maybe 2012, I think. I was interested in helping my friends, and so I expected that someone would have an idea and I would support them and do everything I could, right? And not actually like lead any sort of effort.
You be the friend that other people are helping?
Yeah, so I didn't see myself as that person, I guess. And then towards the early days, the guy that was leading it told everyone that one of the exhibitions had fallen through. So would anyone want to volunteer to, try another exhibit where we reach out to designers and artists to contribute work specifically for the museum? And no one said anything. And then I heard myself sign up, and I was very surprised at the fact that I even did that. But it turned out really great, and I reached out to all of these designers that I had heard or read about before and thought were amazing, and everyone was very gracious. And the exhibit was a success, and the museum was a success too. So I think that's my first time when I realized that I could do something like that, and so that was significant to me that way.
That's cool. All right, so Ezra has another 2 questions. So the first one is just curious, why do you choose to hand cut versus using a laser cutter? So using a Illustrator AI file and cutting something.
Yeah, I mean, I do use a machine sometimes. It's not a laser cutter. It's called a Silhouette Cameo, and it has a little blade and it follows along an AI file. And I do that when I need to make something consistently. Like if I need to make 8 of the same thing and it has to be exactly the same, then it's way easier to use that. I tend to do things by hand because sometimes it's a little bit quicker for me. The side of the brain that does this stuff by hand is way stronger than the side of the brain that thinks of the geometry and the vector files for figuring out how to make all this stuff. But I think both definitely have a place, and like both require different kinds of creativity and planning. So yeah, I definitely do both.
So he also had another question. It said also as a paper artist, and we are going to get into that. So we're just going to dive into this now. Are you represented by an agency? And if not, how do you go about getting new clients? Because you're working as a freelancer, right? That's part of where your story is right now.
Yep. I'm new to freelancing. I just started in November, so take my answers with a grain of salt. But I'm not represented by an agency. I've thought about it, and I would be open to the idea of it because getting new work is really hard. And I think it's kind of a mixture of being out there and kind of having your work in as many places as you possibly can, and then also like personally reaching out to people too. And so yeah, it's tough. Like sometimes I get jobs from people Google searching for a paper artist, and then sometimes it's through Instagram, and sometimes it's from working, not working. It comes from a lot of different places, so I think it's worth it to sort of invest a little time in each of those.
Absolutely. All right, so let's see. Going back to the 100-day project, was there a certain day, the first time when you did it in 14, was there a certain day that you got to where you were like, oh, this is just habit, I'm just doing this? Because I've heard different things. Habits start at 14 days, habits start at 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. What do you think? Because there was a day when it was hard, like, oh, I just don't really want to keep doing this. But then you'd already committed so much time.
Yep. I mean, I think I don't know, maybe a month into it, you start to think, it starts to become a thing where you're like, oh yeah, I have to do this, every day. And so it becomes a little bit more natural to think of instead of, oh, I forgot, I need to do it. So there's that. I think the days when it's hard to do it are still peppered in from 1 to 100. There are days when, depending on how your day went or how you slept or whatever, it's just harder to do. And so, yeah, I think it will become more something that you naturally think of, but I don't think it necessarily becomes like smooth sailing just from one point on forever.
Well, I also think it's one of those things that thinking of something can be, I've heard it can be very debilitating. For some people, you're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Because at 30 days, anybody can come up with 30 ideas, probably. It's maybe pushing it a little bit. But once you get to that 50 or past 50, it kind of can get hard. Like, what am I going to do? What other breakfast foods are there, right?
Yeah, totally. For breakfast especially, it was hard. I think around 80, I couldn't think of more breakfast foods. So I got a little creative, I think. I don't remember when, but there was cold pizza at one point. You know, there's a bunch of different ones. And so, yeah, or I like remix one that I've heard of before, but it has an egg on it this time or something.
Right. The steak is a different shape instead of link sausage or something.
Yeah.
All right. So this kind of goes with Ezra's question about going out on your own. And now that you're a freelancer, what kind of things are you doing to get your name out? So you said networking, but what does that look like? Because I feel like a lot of people are at that same stage and we're still always trying to grow and there's always somebody who doesn't know about you, right? So how do you get into that realm?
I'm still trying to figure this out, but what has worked for me, well, what I've tried so far are things like I've tried cold emailing. So there are a number of clients where I'm like, oh, I would love to work with them, or I feel like my work would fit really well with them. I find whoever the art director could be there, and then I email them. That doesn't seem as successful, to be honest. I mean, I don't know, because you don't know if anyone's ever read that email, or, you know, it's one of those things where you're maybe planting the seed, but you won't see the result of it until later when they actually think of a project that makes sense for you.
Right.
But what actually has been pretty useful for me was that I reached out to a couple blogs. So design blogs that I had looked at when I was a student and still really admired. And so Swissness was one of them, and it was featured on that site. And then I think from there, the internet does its thing where, you know, someone sees that and then says something and then goes somewhere else. And I think that has actually brought me a little bit more work too.
So do you just reach out and say, hey, I have this project, here's some images and I'd love to be featured? Or how do you, I don't know how to craft that email. Maybe it's because I need to go to the 826 and get better at my creative writing, but
no, it's hard. I guess sometimes some blogs have like a submission email or something. I think for some of them I was saying something like, hi, I'm a paper artist. This is what I do. I really love your blog. I thought it might be fun to share this project that I worked on, and then send them a link and keep it really short. The link has all of the image that they would need and some background information too. And so I think making it easy for the other person is a key point, where it's short and anything that they need they can find without having to email back and forth, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. So, all right. So have you ever heard of this? I mean, this is an old book. Me and Kim Panella, we're trying to get better about getting more illustration work. So have you ever seen this book, Artist and...
No.
Okay, you need to get this. I mean, granted, get the one that's not 2006, but they have one for every year, and just so everybody kind of knows. And it's filled with like if you wanted to submit your work to galleries, which probably not for us, but like advertising and design agencies. There's magazines, that book publishers. So like if I think your stuff would be great on making a cover of a book and it's 3D. I mean, not the, you know, they're taking a photograph of it. But I think that there's somebody else that I follow that I've had on the show, Noah Elias. He did a book through Book Rally, and it's BOOKRALLY. I think may have an E in there. But they also take people, you know, to do like you can submit and say you're an artist. They do children's books sometimes. I think yours would be awesome as a children's book. So it's like they have a writer, but somebody needs to design it, or they have a writer and somebody needs to illustrate it. It's a good resource for everybody. But this, I think you can get it online, like, but it's filled with, like, it has different tabs. Like this tab's the book publisher, posters and prints, magazines, greeting cards and gifts. That might also be a good one for you too, just from Because I
Oh
think
yeah. I
physically
actually
they
did a
just are,
greeting card recently.
yeah, they're just, but they look so cute, like taking a picture of them. And,
Hmm.
I don't know. Anyway, I just think that, anyway, that's
No,
a
I appreciate
resource
the
for
brainstorm.
everybody. Yeah, I think so. But I didn't really know, I wouldn't know what to say but now I'm thankful you kind of walked me through the blog thing. All
Yeah,
right.
and it's helpful to know that they are used to getting those emails.
Yeah, for sure. So, and that book tells you that they're expecting or how many illustrations they buy per year or,
Oh, mhm.
so anyway, it kind of gives you an idea.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, something else. Sorry to pop that in there. Um, what type of opportunities are you targeting? Like editorial illustrations, social media ads, stop motion? And are you reaching out to magazines, business to business or business to consumer kind of?
Because what I do is so niche, um, all of the above. I guess so. The thing is, like, I think some people focus in on one industry um, because they're very like they work in all kinds of mediums, for example. But because I do paper, that's primarily the kind of work that I'm trying to get, and so I decided to go freelance partially because I really want to work with variety in terms of
Mm-hmm.
project and client and the type of work and stuff like that. So I've done things like editorial illustrations where I read the article and then I come up with an illustration, but it's made out of paper and photographed.
Mm-hmm.
Or things like for editorial, if someone's writing um, an article on bugs, then I'll make the bugs, and then they'll photograph it and stuff
Right.
like that. Other times I'm working directly with a client on their new marketing assets, for example. So I might make some paper props and bring them on the photo shoot set and style them, and then a photographer takes a photo. What else? Greeting cards. I'm actually going to be doing a book cover for 826 soon, so that should be really exciting.
Hey, that's cool.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm really excited for that. I'm trying to think of what else
But
I've
you
been
know
up
what else you could do? You could do say it was your 100-day project. So
to.
it's all of them are together on a thing and they're now it becomes sheet sets or something. Like people love breakfast. I mean, it seems like it could have more legs. Like there
Mm-hmm.
are some, I mean, you would probably need somebody else, but Amaryllis Henderson is also an illustrator. Now she doesn't work, I mean, she works on paper, but she doesn't work with paper like you do.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like, she goes and she went to the New York stationery show. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, just thinking
Yeah,
of other
totally.
opportunities for you. And,
Yeah,
but that maybe that when you do it your first time, you can do a booth, you can just walk around, you could do a booth.
totally.
And then I don't know, it just might, I mean, cause like I was thinking like it was like a little coffee pot. I don't drink coffee, so maybe it
Mm-hmm.
was a teapot,
Mm-hmm.
but it was purple or something, it had
Yeah,
like purples and blues like that. And like coffee mugs, I can see that like repeating on pajama pants. I mean, people
yeah.
would buy that, I think. And then it has that sort of 3D effect, but it's really just different colors, especially I'm thinking of that one particularly because it's really just, I mean, they're so illustrative, just like the submarine that you showed us. I mean, you're really thinking about something, you're honing it down to be what is needed for people to see this as a submarine. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I
Right.
mean, it's very illustrative.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
all right, Ezra has another question. Enough of me rambling. All right, Ezra is also a paper art, or maybe he's asking, anyway, as a paper artist, do you think it's better to focus on a niche or do a bit of everything? For example, I see a lot of paper artists on Instagram only doing paper portraits. Some only do paper flowers. And have you ever thought of teaching paper crafting class?
I
So
don't know. Yeah, go
do
ahead.
you think it's better to have like a niche kind of thing? I think from what you're saying, you don't want to just put all your eggs in one basket and just do flowers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think one is better than the other, but I personally just like the challenge of making all kinds of different things. Um, and then, yeah, so for me specifically, variety is really cool, and I like the flexibility because I tend to get bored if I just
Mm-hmm.
do one thing. And yeah, I do think of each of the assignments as a challenge where it's like, oh, how do I make a car or how do I make a bagel? And I think
Right.
that's part of the fun of it for me.
Then have you ever thought about teaching a paper crafting class or a
Yeah.
workshop?
Yeah, I was working with a few like corporations, like corporate clients, on doing workshops internally, and then perhaps a Skillshare or that sort of class. So I'm definitely interested in that.
Cool. That's awesome. Um, Derek says, I could do editorial stuff, papermation TV show, children's books, cookbooks. I
Cookbook,
think
yeah.
thinking of those kinds of things. And you did, when you were at Facebook, you did some animations that had, it was like a person's hand went in, pushed a paper button, and then something happened. It was,
Mhm.
so had you already worked in animation, or was that a new kind of challenge for you also?
It was fairly new. I had done it in school just once. It was very lo-fi. And then when I was at Facebook, I worked with some paper artists who had done it before, namely Tommy Perez, and he's amazing with stop motion and paper. And then I actually recently did one with Wired Video. They were trying to explain something really complicated. It was gene editing, and they wanted to make a video to explain it to make it easier. And so that one was stop motion, and they had like the camera rig and everything. So yeah, that's something that I want to get better at and want to do more of.
Do you think you could do that with your camera setup, like on a tripod and do, or do you think, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad, because I think yours have a lot of life, but I think that those really kind of, they just were fun. It felt like something magical coming to life because we knew it was paper, but then something popped out, or, the little starburst came out. I don't know. I just really
Yeah.
thought
Totally.
that was. So Derek has another suggestion or something. Steve Jenkins is a well-known Boulder paper artist who does books for kids, and he picks topics, especially animals and sea creatures, but he's also done books on mountains, etc. And he said, check him out. So we'll put him in the show notes also.
Yeah, I'm writing this down.
I know. Thank you. Derek, Steve Jenkins. I'm writing all this down so I can get it in the show notes as well. Okay. One of the things you talked about at WMC Fest was that you have a team, that it's not just you, that you have a team of supporters. And you talked about this a little bit. Why is that, having those people there, so important? Because I can imagine when you are, having people come over and you're eating dinner and then you're like, hey, let's make some trees, or it might not be normal, but I think it would really be, they would really be happy to help you. I mean, you're so cute and so I would be happy to help you too if I lived in your neighborhood. But why was that so important? Because I do think it kind of takes over. Like if you started in July, I mean, you're doing this until November, and then maybe you're not making every little thing until November, but then you have the install and you need those people. But why is having people as part of your team, not people who you're paying necessarily, but people as part of your team, critical for you?
Well, I guess first off, like something like an install or a lot of things, you just can't do it alone. And so I am really fortunate, I think, because I have friends who know me pretty well and who have known me for decades, who know my work and what I do. And if they call me while I'm doing a window, then they know that I probably can't go anywhere. But they, some of them are helping me with actually making things. One time I asked my roommates if they can help me make little trees for the 826 window. You saw some of the pictures of them. And I thought, maybe they can make 2 or 3 sometime. It's the weekend, whatever. And I came home from working all day on 826, and they were all around the dining table just making tiny trees, like a whole factory of them. They're just drinking wine and like having fun and making these beautiful little trees. And I just, that's the kind of support that I'm so grateful to have. And so there's a level of support where it's, sometimes I need help with actually making the work, especially for windows. And it can also be, a friend who I call on to drive the giant van of props from my house to the window, or who orders pizza while we're all installing, or who makes sure that we have ladders, that kind of thing. And
right.
Even just I think it's the act of showing up, and it's really heartwarming. But it's super important, just because, not only because you can't do it alone, but because it's nice to know that you have an entourage of people that are willing to help. And I had a lot of trouble with that in the beginning because I didn't really like asking for help. I felt like I was inconveniencing people, but at a certain point, I think one of my friends made it clear to me that, like, I really want to help. You just have to tell me how, and that kind of thing. So
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, and then you also, even online, so if people don't know people like that in their area, I don't know how you meet good people that will help you build trees, but also when you did the 100-day project, just having other people going through it at the same time, I think they may not, I think you end up connecting somebody with somebody else that really does continue to encourage you. And I think sometimes it's just you showing up and doing it, and them showing up and commenting really makes a difference, I think.
Yeah, that was one of the unexpected outcomes of the 100-day project the first time. Was I wasn't used to having people I didn't know liking or commenting on anything that I posted, because I hadn't really posted work before that. But it was really cool. Everyone was like tapping on the hashtag for the 100-day project to see all of the other projects and kind of popping in to be like, this is really great, and that's sort of what keeps you going around day 60 when it's way harder. So
right.
Yeah, that was really great.
So Ezra has another question. Mm-hmm. How would be a beginner go about learning how to do stop motion animation with paper? So can you go back to like when you were in school and it was real lo-fi? Mm-hmm. What did you do then, and kind of what were some steps that you would tell somebody to take now?
I don't think you need fancy equipment. There are even stop motion apps for iPhones and Android devices that help you actually line up your photos and stuff like that. When I first did my project, I made a bunch of little props that had magnets in them. And then I had a cookie sheet, and I put green on there as my like paper layer for the ground. And then all of my props would stick because of the magnets. And I would just move them, take a picture, move them again, take a picture. And so I think if you can think of just a simple story, and it doesn't even have to be 3D, it's just being able to show a story happening with just really minuscule movements, then I think that's all you really need. And you can pop them into one of the stop motion software, like either on iPhone or on the computer to string them all together.
That's a great tip. And I want to share a couple of other things that you shared with me. Because I said, oh, do you do your own photos? And you said, yes, I do mostly my lighting. I use natural light, but then you also use a softbox light, which I'm going to share that in the chat right now.
Sure.
So when would you use this lighting, and why?
I have to preface this by saying that I haven't used it that often, but I'm kind of learning to do studio lighting a little bit more. Natural light is my absolute favorite, but sometimes it's not available. So when it's too dark outside, I have started using these softbox lights. And yeah, I think it's just good to have that alternative, and also to get well versed in lighting, because I do so much of it, so much of my own photography.
All right. And then I can't believe nobody's asked this question. Ezra, I'm disappointed in you for not asking this one, but it's about the glue, because especially on those trees, you have this tiny, it looks like a toothpick. I mean, it's not a toothpick, but it's tiny. So the kind of glue you are able to use for certain projects, obviously some glues you're going to have more paper that overlaps, so it's not as critical. But and are you at all worried about like pH and acid free when you're talking about your glue or your paper?
Here, let me show you.
You guys notice that the tree has a crown?
Oh yeah. It says Yas on it. Yeah, I made the crown, and then my roommate put it on the tree. This is the glue I use. It's like kind of old and crackly, but it's just pH neutral PVC glue. That's mostly what I use. I think I put it in the.
I am. It is. Yep. And so I'm gonna put it in the chat, and these are also all in the show notes. So they're already on her page there, so we can make sure we get that to everybody.
When I'm doing bigger things, I use a glue gun, but this one is one that has a needle.
Small tip.
Yeah. So.
But you still have thick glue coming out.
Yeah, it's giant. I think.
Holy moly!
It's Bosch, so I think it's like kind of hardcore industrial. And you can, this one you can get on Amazon, but it comes from Europe, I think. I don't know. It takes forever to get here, but this is the only one I found, and my friend Kat told me about it, that has the needle nose. So it comes out a little cleaner, but hot glue is really messy to begin with, so I don't use it too often. Only if it's structural.
So then you also said like one of your go-to things was an XL K2 knife. What does that look like?
I'm an evangelist for this type of knife. I'll show you that too. So it's just an X-Acto, but it's fatter.
Yeah.
And I prefer the Excel brand just because I feel like the blades are a little bit stronger. And then because the angle at the end of this isn't as sharp as a normal sized blade, I feel like you get a little bit better control.
Do you sharpen your blades, or do you just throw them away?
I have to throw them away. I don't have a good way of.
Do you know you can use just like, printmakers are pretty thrifty. Yeah. And the printmaker at my school, Megan Moore, she's not here anymore. She lives in New York, but she uses a fine tooth black sandpaper grit, and then you don't have to go through as many blades.
Oh, maybe I'll try that.
I know. Well, and she does a lot of tiny little cuts a lot, and they didn't want to.
Yeah, because this is my blade disposal. I have so many in here.
Yeah.
And I have packs of 100, so I have quite a few.
Well, you might just want, maybe it's not worth it, but then you could get a little bit more life out of them, because sometimes after you've cut a little bit, you really they're kind of dead.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
So two more questions from the audience. Nikki asked, do you ever have wrist or hand problems? If so, what do you use to ease or remedy it? Because I bet, you're doing this every day.
I actually don't have that many wrist or hand problems, but I have more like neck problems, just because I'm looking down at the things that I'm cutting out, and a lot of it is really detailed. And so I've worked with a desk that's more like a drafting table that goes diagonal, and that helps because it gets closer. But then things slide down and fall off my desk. So it's kind of a dilemma, I guess. I just have to make sure I get up and stretch.
And then Daniel asked, do you ever use a swivel tip knife? I was wondering about this too.
No, I have never done that.
So X-Acto makes a swivel tip. They also have finger knives that you put in your finger at the craft. I tried it. I didn't like it, but
yeah.
But maybe you would. I don't know. I felt like I wanted the pencil kind of feel when I was cutting.
Yeah. I know a lot of people that cut with scalpels, like medical grade. Especially like if they did design school in England, that seems like the normal thing to use.
Huh. Daniel also said you might want to test whether or not a pyramid will sharpen those old blades. I don't know what a pyramid is. Like in Egypt? I'm just kidding. I don't know, Daniel, you'll have to write me and tell me what you're talking about. Oh, Ezra said, do you ever use a tape runner? Does that pH glue dry fast?
What's a tape runner?
Oh, you don't know what a tape runner is? Hang on, let me get one and show you. These are my favorite. So I worked at a scrapbooking magazine when I first got out of school when I was in Denver. And so this is, I don't really like this brand.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Tape runner. And they're refillable. This is a Tombow adhesive. Have you ever used this?
I haven't really used those. I mostly use glue, I guess. Sometimes I use, like if I need to do something, the equivalent of that, I do use double stick tape sometimes, because if you're doing like really big expansive paper to another really big expansive paper, then the glue warps it, So I'll use tape. But most of the time I use this glue. It dries fairly fast. It dries clear. And what I like about it, compared to other white glues, is that it doesn't get stretchy as it dries. So it's not like things are kind of stretching all over the place.
Right.
And then I put the silicone tools in the tool list, but I use that to apply the glue.
So do you have one of those? Because I'll stick that in. You also had one other tool, so I want to make sure people, okay.
And then it's nice because then you can just pop off the dry glue and then use it again. But sometimes I also just use little corners of pieces of paper if I need to get somewhere really fine.
That's good to know. So the last thing that you had sent me was a metal cork backed ruler. So I have cut off a ton. Can you see how much I lost of this finger?
Mm.
So see how much I lost? That was the first time I cut it. The next time, it's pretty bad. You can't see it because it's not focusing. But anyway, so I've had some serious injury where I had to go to the hospital. Yeah. So what about you? Have you look like you have all your digits. So
I have all my digits. I haven't really ever cut myself, knock on wood. But I also, I kind of, I have a fear a little bit of the blade, so I try to cap it whenever I can. And then I guess the most injury is like paper cuts when I'm handling large sheets of paper. So that doesn't happen as often. But yeah, the cork back ruler helps because it doesn't slip.
I know. You know, I see my students, they'll turn it over. And I'm like, hey, you're not using that ruler right. I'm like, you need the cork down. Anyway, I guess.
Yeah, or if you cut on an aluminum ruler that's only for measuring, then it'll cut into the ruler itself too.
Yeah.
That's our tough one.
I like the metal for sure. So 6 inches is really all you need, or do you have a longer ruler too?
I have a ton. So 6 inches is if I'm just working at my desk and doing the small stuff, but I have 15, 18, and 24 too.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's good. All right. So I have a ton of more questions. So we may just have to do a part 2. But okay. I have so enjoyed having you on, and I'm so thankful that you took so much time to share. And I hope that I see your work on pajama pants sometime soon.
Thank you.
But I want to make sure everybody knows Kim Piniella and I are doing this thing for the month of February, and we're doing 5 kind of giveaways. Maybe there will be a tape runner in there also, but for sure there's going to be a water brush or 2 water brushes and some tools that her and I both really just like. So we're doing 3 giveaways for the first 2 weeks when we are posting, and then you just comment and you tag 2 friends in it, but you have to like both Kim Piniella and Design Recharge. And then the last 2 weeks, we will choose someone live at next Design Recharge. And there's lots of things in this, so it's not just little bitty like a art snacks box. It'll have some tools, but we're also going to have a couple other things to inspire you, things for you to send to somebody else. And so this week is so that what we're calling it is Love on Designers. So you can use the hashtag. So maybe this week we're wanting everybody to energize. So there will be some coffee stickers that Kim has come up with. You can check all these out. I'm going to put this bit.ly link so you can kind of see what the rules are, and you can on Instagram, you'll see these coffee pod stickers that Kim's made, and just to make somebody's day, or maybe take somebody to coffee this week, or just bring them a cup of coffee, or give them something. Just, it could be somebody who's a designer, somebody who's a creative, somebody at your work, or somebody who you're a freelancer and you don't work with anybody, so it's somebody else. So just kind of loving on somebody else this whole month, except 1 week, the 3rd week, is all about loving on yourself. So you're going to get a massage or pedicure or whatever. Do something for yourself. Maybe go to the movies. We have some ideas of you to do. And then the show notes will be, let me get that for you right now, Ezra. And let's see, it will be right here. I should have just done this. Copy link. I'm going to plop that in right here. I should have made a bit.ly for that, but that's where it's rechargingyou.com. If you type in Reina Takahashi, Takahashi, you would be able to find that, or Reina Soar, which is her handle. So I'm going to share her website right now, and I'm going to go ahead and say it. So your website is www.reina and then saur.com. So I love that. How did you come up with that name?
Oh, it's just a nickname from college. I actually sometimes think it's like one of those, like, you know, AIM screen names in middle school that you're sort of embarrassed about, but you anyway. It's kind of like that.
Well, I love it. I think it's terrific. I imagine this little dinosaur with little bitty arms, kind of like a T-Rex, I guess. But then you can also find her on Instagram and on Twitter with that same REINASAUR. It's pretty good. That's pretty short. That's a great, I think Anna Mac had one more question. Have you ever used glue dots or Scotch and U-line both make it. And they also have a pop-up adhesive dot. Have you ever done that to make things pop out? There's,
Oh yeah. Oh, I don't know.
do you know what I'm talking about? There's like 3D
Is it spongy?
dots. Yeah.
Yeah, I use those sometimes to like kind of level things up a little bit. The glue dots I don't really use very often, just because I use adhesive so often. I
You
think
don't
it's a
need
little
it.
expensive for what it is.
Yeah. Well, and they, I've tried to cut them. Like they have small ones and then they have bigger ones. They really stick to the scissors or the knife blade. If you're cutting it, it's really adhesive, I guess. So, but and I also wanted to share one more thing. Andrew Berkemeyer was on back, I think, in November, and he had his first single come out. And so I told him I would share it. And so I'm going to pop that over. All this will be in the show notes, the Love on Designer stuff, as well as Andrew's new song. Check it out. It was great. I bought it last week, I think, but it came out on February 2nd. So this is my first opportunity to share it. So thank you guys all for coming. I hope you guys will come back. We come every week. Next week, we have David Breyer, who's a branding guru. He's been in the business for quite some years, and he's really has a great way of looking at things. He has a ton of energy, and I can't wait to have him on the show too. But thank you so much, Reina, for being here and being super inspiring. And I'm sorry we only got through half the questions, but
it's okay. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad. So guys, we'll see you next week.